please pick the brains of the people that are here that have gone on them about how to take a sabbatical afterwards. But right now we're going to delve a little more into some of the emotional and experiential aspects of taking sabbaticals. First of all, I would like to introduce our speakers. First of all, we have Michelle, who took a sabbatical from her work here in the Bay Area. We also have Tara, who took a sabbatical and now currently helps people taking sabbaticals and in life coaching. And we also have Joe, who took a sabbatical years back and ended up now helping people and consulting a bit other people on taking sabbaticals as well. So we've got the whole range of spectrum from people who've taken them to people showing others how to do it, how to take them. So we'll get started. Let's start off with Michelle. Please just explain a little bit about what happened, why, a little bit of why, what happened, and just a little 5-10 minutes of what went down.
I was at work. I was at my job for 9 or 10 years, and I was feeling like every day was the same old, same old, same old. Maybe some people like routines, but I was feeling really tired of just the mundaneness of every day. And I always daydreamed about traveling somewhere. So when I was bored at work, I would go online and Google different places I wanted to go to. But I always felt like it wasn't possible, and so it was just something that I kind of dreamt about and thought about. And then just talking to different people, I finally decided that maybe it was something that is realistic and that I could do. So I hung up a map on my bedroom wall and I put tacks on all the different countries I wanted to go to. And I started researching what to see in these different places. A couple of people that when they heard about my plan said, I want to go too. And I said, it's just something I wanted to do by myself. I didn't want to be with my own little culture following me around wherever I went. And the next thing that I thought of was telling my bosses, because I wanted to go for a substantial amount of time. I didn't want to go for 2 weeks and come home. So I wanted to go for 5 months, and July to December. And I didn't want to just go to one country either. I wanted to go to lots of different countries back to back and have different cultures back to back. So I basically told my employers, which was true, I'm either going to quit my job or may I have a sabbatical to go on this trip. And I was prepared to quit my job, and they said, we'll give you a sabbatical. So I got that time off of work and was able to come back. But I went to Europe, Egypt, Southeast Asia, Australia, New Zealand. And so I had lots of different experiences. Do you want me to talk about where I came back or just what I did?
Just like what came back and what did you do?
After I came back, what I did?
Yeah.
Okay.
So just the what?
The what?
We'll get into it.
Yeah, so after I came back, I just went back to my same job that I was at before, which was really great, so that I had that to fall back into. And I'm still doing the career that I did before I left.
Thank you. Tara?
Hi, my name is Tara, and as Lee was mentioning, I'm actually a life sabbatical coach now, which started when I took my own life sabbatical. I didn't even know what coaching was, and so I took my own sabbatical a couple years after college. So after graduation, I worked for a couple years, saved every cent that I could. I was actually living in New Orleans. I went to Tulane and was working as an EMT after college. I'd never gotten to study abroad, so I saw like so many of my classmates like take off and go to London and Paris and South America, I mean everywhere. And I was working my way through school and just could not afford to do that. But I had always really, really wanted to travel. So like you, it was just, okay, daydreaming about it. And I'm dating myself by saying this, but I used to go to bookstores back when they had bookstores, and basically just huff Lonely Planet guidebooks to get high is my joke. Like I would just like sit and pore over like atlases, and I'm not kidding. And you'd walk into the travel section back when they had Borders and just like, oh, look at this. So for 2 years I was basically just planning and saving. And one of the things I tell people is that if I can do this, anyone can do this. I literally earned a year worth of freedom off of $9 an hour. And people thought I was crazy. I mean, I was in Louisiana working as an EMT, so I'm sitting in the back of the ambulance between calls, learning Portuguese off of CDs. Again, dating myself before the iPod. And my partner thought I was nuts. So anyway, but I did it. And so I was gone for about a year. I was gone from May of 2004 to May of 2005 and spent some time road tripping around the States. I spent about 4 months in South America and 6 in Asia. And it was amazing. It was like shoestring budget. not quite hitchhiking, but almost, like sleeping on the beach, and it changed my life in ways that I couldn't even imagine, because then I came back. And again, so I didn't do the negotiating of a sabbatical because I knew I was moving from New Orleans to here. But what I was going to do when I got here, I really didn't know. I basically sold off most of my stuff, put some things in boxes, moved them to San Francisco, threw them in storage, and left. So when I came back, I got a job at a consulting firm here in San Francisco, and a couple things were happening. I loved my boss, and I liked a lot of people that I worked with. I got very lucky with that part, but I hated my job, and I was doing what you were doing. I was kind of sitting there in my cubicle and comforting myself. And reentry can be rough, and you go from being on the road, and I was like, photographing geisha in Japan and hiking the Annapurna circuit in Nepal, and the next thing you know, I was like, I'm living in a veal pen on Sutter and Stockton. I was in a cubicle all day long. And what was really happening at this point was I was meeting so many other people like you who were saying like, oh, I've always wanted to do what you did. And I would get super excited for them and be like, that's great, when are you going? And they'd be like, probably never. And they had this like weird, and you've seen it. I mean, like, you're laughing because it's true. People get all excited about it, and then they're like, yeah, so I'll never do it. And that's when something clicked for me, and I started to get curious. Like, wait, if I can do this, anybody can do this. I did not come from a traveling family. My family's idea of a vacation was chasing the Amish in our broke-ass family station wagon. True story. My mom didn't have a passport until she was in her 50s, and that's only because my little sister moved to France, and I figured, she wanted to see her daughter, she should probably get a passport. And I didn't make a lot of money when I was saving for my trip. So I really mean this from my heart. If I can do it, anyone can do it. So I started to ask people, why aren't you going? Like, what is going on that keeps Americans from doing these types of trips that other countries consider their birthright? I mean, Australians, Brits, Israelis, they're all just like, of course I'm on the road for 3 years. Why would I not be? And that's when I started to really realize what's really going on, which is just perceived obstacles, limiting beliefs, and fear. And I'm like, well, that's not real stuff, though. And at the same time, I started to get introduced to coaching as a field and realized this would be an incredible fit for helping people take trips like this. Because coaching is all about, what does your life look like, what do you want it to look like, and what's the gap analysis, and how do we get you there? So basically, I had a light bulb moment at one point in 2005, and I called my boyfriend, and I was like, I'm going to be home late, I have to start a company. And he asked me if I'd gone to happy hour. And that's how 3-month visa started. And after that, I basically just started getting out there and finding people who wanted trips like this, who were like, I don't want to live in my cubicle anymore, and they would pull these like fully formed dreams down off the shelf and dust them off. I want to study Spanish in Guatemala, I want to trace my family's roots in Ireland, I want to teach English in China. Like, you name it, everybody's got one, gathering dust. And so I was like, I'm going to help you do that. And that's how my company started.
Hi, I'm Joe. I actually huffed some Lonely Planet books on my way over here to get. So I moved to Boston in 2007 to work for a negotiation and relationship management consulting firm called Vantage Partners. And by the time 2010 came around, I was a bit restless. I had spent a year in graduate school studying international relations in Bologna, and now it had been 5 years since I had spent some extended time overseas. And ultimately, my passion is doing international conflict management work, and I wasn't fulfilling that at Vantage in Boston. It just wasn't happening for me, and I felt like if that was a career goal, then I needed to take some steps to make it happen. And we had gone through a round of layoffs near the end of 2008, and at one point they had said, if anyone else is thinking about leaving, just let us know in advance. This is a very small firm with a unique company culture, and so I went to my boss one day in March 2010, and I said, I love working here. And I've got this serious goal of mine professionally to do international conflict management work, and unless there's a way for me to begin to meet that goal, I just don't see myself staying here beyond a few months. And I didn't quite know how my boss was going to react to that, but he reacted by saying, well, we really want you to stay here, and we'll consider all sorts of different things in order for you to stay. And I could imagine, seconding you to Mercy Corps, which is an NGO based out of Portland that does international development work, and then you could return. Or we could send you here or there. Why don't you go talk with some of the partners at the firm and brainstorm some ideas and come back with a recommendation? So I did that, and ultimately what I proposed was kind of a 6-month secondment. You're working for a related organization, in this case Mercy Corps, that does conflict management work overseas, and then coming back to Vantage and working at least 6 months beyond that. As it turned out, my lease was ending at the end of August, and so when my boss said, we really want you to commit to staying through the end of 2010, and it was March, and I wanted to leave as soon as possible, I was like, well, my lease is ending at the end of August. Could I at least work remotely from LA, for the last 4 months of the year? And he said, fine. And then he kind of put me in touch with someone at Mercy Corps to work out the details of this secondment. And ultimately, Mercy Corps has programs all over the world, Iraq and Afghanistan and Guatemala, Kenya, Sudan. And we kind of figured out where did it make sense for me to go. And ultimately, we decided on 3 months in Kenya, 3 months in Guatemala. And so that was the first 6 months of 2011. And the program in Kenya was designed to promote reconciliation among different ethnic communities. Some people may be aware that there was a lot of post-election violence at the end of 2007. And so all these NGOs were kind of undertaking efforts to ensure that that didn't happen this time around. The elections were actually a week ago. And so far the results have been better than they were last time. And my goal while I was there was essentially to teach workshops on resolving disputes, on managing conflict, on influencing people to shun violence and instead resolve disputes in a peaceful way. So I was working with youth leaders and leaders of these peace committees and just supporting the efforts of this Mercy Corps program. After 3 months there, I then went to a different program in Guatemala where there are lots of land disputes. Different communities will lay claim to the same piece of land. Or a farm owner will want to evict a community of people who are living on their piece of land, and there's a local effort to mediate those disputes in a peaceful way, and I was supporting that program by working with the mediators on some new tools, concepts, frameworks for resolving disputes. After the 6 months, I returned to the consulting firm in Boston, and I think what was most unique about my time abroad was that when I'm in Boston, I'm always deferring to the partners at the firm, and they kind of lead the workshops and they design it, and I'm there to play a very small role. When I was overseas in East Africa, and I also did some workshops in Ethiopia and Uganda while I was there, some of those workshops were in regions with no electricity. There was no partner there to help me. There was no creative design team to create all the materials. You're kind of on your own. And so when the generator that provides the power stops abruptly in the middle of the session, it's your job to figure out how to make it happen. Or when you're dealing with a group of folks who are only semi-literate and are there primarily because they've been given a per diem to attend the session, you need to figure out how to manage that. So by the time I got back to Vantage, I was all of a sudden seen as someone who could actually lead sessions on my own. And that led me to where I am today, which is I conduct workshops for Vantage, 1 and 2 day sessions for large companies around the States and overseas.
Awesome. Thank you guys. Yeah, so let's start in on the questions. We're gonna start with you, Michelle. What came first, the travel or the work break?
Or the what?
Or the work break?
Work break.
Yeah, like was it leaving the work or was it more the idea of traveling that drew you?
It was the idea of travel, definitely.
Yeah.
I just felt like I wanted to see the world, and I would go for 2 weeks and then come back, and I felt like I didn't even leave. So it was definitely the break, the travel break. Yeah.
And when you the initial stages, realizing that you wanted to lead and go travel, what did you worry about? Not worry about. What did you focus on when talking to your bosses and coworkers about?
Responsible, and it's too much money, and all these things. So finally, by the time I decided, my employer had done something similar when she was younger, so I knew that was on my side. And I just presented it like, this is something that feeds my soul. It's something I want to do, and I would love to come back if possible. And I think I'll be a better employee when I come back. So I worded it that way, and they were kind of thinking, okay, how are we going to do this? But they wanted to support me, and they did.
And with your coworkers, what was it like?
They were all really excited because I would tell them, and they were just really, really excited about it, and just asking a lot of questions, and yeah.
Awesome. And while you were away, I think it's interesting. In your case, it wasn't work related. When you were gone.
Yeah.
You got away.
Yeah. Yeah. Completely.
Was the driver, when you were gone, did you ever have a moment where you thought about might not be coming back?
People were worried about that, and I said, you can't just stay in another country. You have to come back. When I came back, I wanted to leave again. So I was thinking in my mind, oh no, I'm going to go back to this job again. Oh no, I'm going to go back to the same spot again. And I was worried about what that would feel like. So I started thinking about, well, maybe I can live in a different country. I started thinking about what I wanted to do. So yes, I was worried about coming back to the same thing that drove me nuts when I left.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, you know, once you got back, what was Michelle like before compared to the one that was back after the trip in your work?
In my work, just in work. Okay. Well, first, I wanted to say that people told me, you're going to change so much. Even my employer who did a similar thing said, you're going to change. And I came back, and I was at the same place, same job, same everything, and I was angry because I felt like nothing changed. And before I left, I was feeling kind of insecure at work. Like I didn't really know what I was doing. I felt that way. And so I started back, and those same voices came up, like, I don't know what I'm doing. But after my trip, a different voice popped up and said, yeah, you do. You know what you're doing. Just think about it. I'm a therapist, so people talk to me about their problems. And before I left, I thought, I don't know, good luck with that. I don't know what to tell you. But when I came back, it kind of started, coming to me. So it changed a lot. It really changed a lot. My friends will say that before I left, I said I just didn't like my job, and now I really, really love my job. So drastic difference.
And so personally, that's how it was, like with your bosses and with the work environment, the structure of the company. What was the difference once you came back in terms of the treatment to you and the treatment towards the concept of a sabbatical in your company?
The treatment of me was the same. It was really great. I didn't feel like anybody was resentful or anything, and they hired somebody to take my place while I was gone, and when I came back, I got to slip right back into what I did before. And I don't think anybody else there would ever ask for a sabbatical. I'm not sure. But I think if they did, that they would find a way to accommodate, that it was really fine. It wasn't nothing, it went really smoothly while I was gone.
Cool. And finally, when's your next sabbatical?
I don't know. I've been going on little trips, which have been feeding my, desire to travel. So that's been good. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Joe, we're going to jump to you. So in your concept of going back to the pre-game, the pre-ditch,
Yeah.
what was your driver? Like, what was it? Was it because in your case, knowing that you worked with a different entity, but you did some of the same work that you did here at home.
Right.
Was it getting away, or was it being able to do the same but somewhere else?
Yeah, it was a few different things going on. I mean, for sure, part of it was the monotony of a job that I've been doing every day for a couple of years, and that was kind of weighing on me. Part of it was knowing what my career aspirations were and that they weren't being fulfilled completely in my current work. And part of the desire was to go overseas and to experience living in, again, I'd had this kind of, I was restless, and it had been 5 years since I had really spent significant time abroad, and I wanted to experience a new culture, live in a new place, and simultaneously advance my international public management career in some way.
Great. And what would you recommend would be, in your experience, you and Michelle kind of had the same gig in the sense that you guys were in some companies where you had to deal with the boss,
right.
Explain the concept of sabbatical. Had they been doing sabbaticals beforehand? And after you answer that, what would you recommend to people in terms of taking those steps to acquire a sabbatical? How do you get them?
Yeah, I mean, my employer had never done something like this. That said, there are lots of employers around the world that have very formal, what you'll call secondment programs. I have a friend who was working for a large financial services company, and they sent him to Shanghai for 11 months. A lot of law firms have overseas offices, and they'll send people. I think generally you have to pay your dues at least somewhat, right? I mean, you can't, it's not a perk you can just expect, like vacation days or 20% time or something like that. I mean, you have to actually meet or exceed expectations, number one. I think it's helpful if you can find someone senior within the organization to become a mentor to you, someone who can advocate on your behalf. And then most importantly, and I think Michelle described this, you need to be able to articulate the benefits to the employer. In this case, it wasn't so hard because they actually suggested that I go and work for this related organization. But I think if you're the one proposing that you take some time off and there's no formal program in place, talk about what sort of skills you would acquire or enhance that you can then bring back to your work to add value to the company.
Great. When you were in during your sabbatical and you're doing similar work and whatnot, what did you notice? You mentioned earlier the leadership position. You're thrust from being a kind of soldier to a general, overnight. What else did you notice in terms of your approach to work and your attitude towards work? What started evolving over that time period while you were abroad?
Sure. I'd say, one thing you learn not to sweat the small stuff as much. It gives you a lot more confidence to handle any sort of difficult situation. So I mentioned in Karamoja, Uganda, running a session where there was no electricity, and then you have to switch from giving a presentation to actually just teaching on the fly. In different regions, especially Kenya, Uganda, Ethiopia, people are on Africa time. So you think, workshop's starting at 9 o'clock, half the group isn't there by 11. And you just have to adjust. Now, something that you had set aside like 8 hours for, you have to do it less than 6. In Guatemala, just different culture. In Guatemala, when someone calls you on your cell phone, particularly if you don't know who the person is that's calling, like that takes priority over any conversation you might be having at the moment. So I'm like running a session, and there's someone right in front of me who just picks up the phone and is talking so loud that I can't even, I wanted to grab his phone and throw it. And then there's, of course, language differences. There were reporters who wanted to cover this event as part of a bigger program, and they come in during the middle of the session and wanted to interview me while I was actually running this. So it just, you gain confidence in just knowing that whatever comes up, you can kind of handle it. And then by the time I got back to Vantage, I think there was just a perception that, now I had kind of done this on my own, and I was able to take on greater responsibilities.
Right. And while you were over there, did you as well, during this kind of, the job's kind of cool on this side, I'd kind of like to stay abroad. Was there ever that thinking of burning the boats?
Yeah. I think that honoring commitments is really important. So I had made a very firm commitment to my employer that I would come back for 6 months. And I think some of my coworkers, speculated that I wasn't going to return. As much fun as I was having, and I did have a lot of fun, I went kayaking on the Nile, and I did the safari, and climbed volcanoes and all that. I knew I was going to come back, at least for the minimum that I committed to. After those 6 months, paid my dues, did what I said I would do. Then I thought, well, maybe I'd go back, and I still am kind of planning my next, stint overseas. But I think if I had said, you know what, Vantage, thanks for sending some money to this nonprofit so that I could work overseas for 6 months, I don't actually have to come back. I didn't sign a contract. I think that would have had some negative repercussions.
And now that you're back, what are the benefits? What's the added value to your work, but also personally that you notice that your takeaways from having been abroad and still performing the job that you're doing here abroad,
right,
different ambiance?
I think personally, a big part of it is just the experience of understanding and working with different cultures. Understanding that people do things in very different ways. I think just greater confidence. I have a lot more confidence kind of being up in front of the room and working with people. I also think that there was a lot of value just delivered to me. So for example, people in Kenya would say, we don't know what's going to happen when the next elections come around, but if there's peace, you should know that you'll have done your part. And there's such gratitude, I think, in Kenya and Guatemala about the opportunity to learn something that maybe they didn't know. When I teach workshops here in the States, big companies, everyone has completed their MBA and they've taken a bunch of negotiation courses, and half the time they're outside on calls or on their smartphones, and there it just felt like it was something that was such an opportunity for them. And at the same time, they enriched me with their perspectives that maybe were kind of unique and something that I hadn't heard of before.
Great. Thank you. Tara, so now that you've taken a sabbatical, you've also helped people take them, helped people come back from them. Before, like, if someone's sitting there not even knowing if they're supposed to take a sabbatical, what are the signs? What are things?
If you're contemplating taking a sabbatical, you should take a sabbatical.
There it is.
No, I mean, the serious question is, I mean, if you're really thinking about it, if that thought is there, it probably means it's been percolating for a long time. I mean, by the time people actually contact me and or I run into them, anyone who goes, oh my gosh, where have you been? If it's something that you're harboring, it's something that, it's like, your mind being like, psst, point, which is that, and you talked about, like, you have to put in your dues. So once you have, know your worth. I mean, here's the thing, if you've only been there for 3 months, you don't have as much to bargain with. But a lot of my clients have been working really hard for 5, 6, 7 years or decades. Like, if you've been there a while, if you've put in your dues, speak corporate. And what I mean by that is know your worth, know what you're worth to them. They don't really care that you want to have an eat, pray, love experience and find your soulmate in Bali, and like, they don't care. And that's okay. Like, I care that my clients go do that. But what they want to know is, how does your sabbatical benefit me? So when you pitch it to your employer, what you want to say is, I've so appreciated being here, and here's why. Here's what I know I've contributed. I'm at a crossroads where I feel that this time off will give you this. And then that's how you pitch it. So, translate backpack into briefcase for them, and they're much more likely to help you out. And then if worse comes to worse, I mean, know your worth, speak corporate, and be willing to walk away. If worse comes to worse, quit.
What are the things that people should be taking into consideration once they've decided, hey, I'm going to take a sabbatical? What do you need to, having taken one and seen people come back from it? What are some of those key points that would have been great to know before?
I think, especially on the career front, there's really strategic, got a little mariachi going on. There's very strategic moves that you can make before, during, and after your trip to actually make the trip work, not just for you on a personal level. And again, go, have the eat, pray, love experience, have it be personally fulfilling. But you can actually make it look really good on your resume. And so the 3 things that I tell people to look at doing is, before you leave, market, like, there's a spin to it. Market your sabbatical not only to your employer, but also to potential employers for when you come home. Do informational interviews before you leave. And just like, hey, Bob, I'd love to have lunch with you. Let them know that you're going. Tell them what the intention of your trip is. And let them know when you're thinking of coming home. Because that makes you sticky. So you've been sitting there and so you're like, oh, Joe, I'm going to be doing this, and I'm planning on coming home in August of next year. I would love for you to keep me in mind for this type of project when I re-enter. That gives you a reason to reach out to them from the road and be like, hey, I'm going to be back in August, and I'm so grateful that we had that lunch. So work your networks before you go. Touch people. Have informational lunches. Solidify your network, and update your resume before you go. While you're on the road, there's 2 things that you can do. You want to think about your sabbatical almost like a job. Like, when you're pitching yourself to a hiring manager when you come home, they're not going to want to hear about your hippie backpacking and how you spent your time surfing with hot Australians in Sydney. Go do that. But what they want to know is about your cross-cultural, a lot of what Joe talked about, which is, your cross-cultural experience, the patience, like the skill sets that you've built. So think of 2 things. A, what are the experiences that you can have while you're on the road that you can put on your resume? And what skill sets are you building? So, when you get some snarky hiring manager who's like, what's this on your resume? You can pitch it as a job that has built you as a potential employee, and that sets you apart. And then when you come back, be ready to sell that. Like, don't hide your sabbatical on your resume. Don't bury it. Would probably be what I would say. And then go and have your personal, your sabbatical all for you.
those are great points. I think we should definitely talk about the elephant in the room. A lot of people, I'll be honest, myself included, I've got bills to pay.
Mm-hmm.
I've got obligations here in the homestead. I've got obligations to my work. So if I ever thought of leaving my job and going abroad and leaving the cause for a while to go off and do my time so I can find myself. I've got people here that depend on me. I've got no money that I can definitely donate to this cause. I don't really have the time. What do you say to that?
How much time do you have? So that's the thing. I mean, those are our resources: time and money and effort, and we choose how we allocate them. And so when we say here in the Bay, especially if you live in a major metropolitan area in the United States, when you're saying I don't have money, let's chat. Because, and one of the things that I do, finance is always something that I have to cover with clients, even if they're sitting on a boatload of money, which most people aren't. How are you going to use it mindfully? How do you want to allocate it? Finances always come up. And people think that travel is expensive. And the real truth of it is living in San Francisco is expensive. You're going to be pleasantly surprised anywhere else. But the example that I always give, because this was such a light bulb moment for her, is that early on in my coaching career, I had a client who came to me who I actually knew from my consulting firm. So I knew her daily habits, and I knew she could afford this trip. But she came to me and she said, I really can't afford the time off. And I was like, all right. And I knew she was wrong. But I said, I want you to take the next 2 weeks and I want you to write down every cent that you spend. If you spend $1 on the Chronicle, again, dating myself, but we used to have it, it was this paper thing. The Chronicle, you have to write that down. So she came back and she puts down her little Moleskine notebook and she's like, look, I can't afford it. And I was like, you are spending $1,200 a year at Starbucks. She's like, no, I'm not. I'm like, yeah, you are. And we're going to ignore the fact that I know you go back in the afternoon for an iced coffee because I used to work with you. If you go, we have these weird rituals every day in our lives that we don't think about where our money just flows. So, a scone and a latte every morning, that's $5. If you forget the weekends, you don't even, I'm going to pretend I don't know that you ladies go out and have Bloody Marys with your girlfriends on the weekend, and good for you. But that's $25 a week, $100 a month, $1,200 a year, and that's a round the world plane ticket. So when we get really mindful about where our money's going, and I say when I was saving for my trip, there were plenty of times when I was like, oh, I'd love those cute shoes, but you're not going to wear 4-inch heels when you're hiking Machu Picchu, so don't waste your money. It definitely requires a real being honest with yourself about where your money is going and being willing to tighten the belt in places where you can then reallocate that money, but then you suddenly realize what it's for, and it doesn't really matter. So I remember sitting here with her and she suddenly realized, oh my gosh, $5 a day is $1,200 a year. And the amazing part about this woman was it clicked so readily that she suddenly was militant about saving money, and she left 3 months early because she was suddenly like, oh, and I don't need those shoes because I'm not going to wear them on the road, and then I don't need that blouse because I'm not going to wear that on the road. And it was she got very clear on where the money was going. So we have little luxuries every day in our lives that cost us that freedom to get out there and go. And the other thing to look at is not only where your money is going and where you can change that up a bit. And you don't have to wear a hair shirt and sleep on a marble slab. That's not what I'm saying. But rather than going out to a wine bar and having 3 glasses of Zin, you could have friends over and do a wine tasting at your house, and everybody brings a bottle. It's just as much fun, and it was free for you. But the other thing is looking at what things cost abroad. You suddenly start doing travel math. So rather than a $5 latte in the morning, you're suddenly realizing that's breakfast, lunch, and possibly dinner in Kathmandu, Nepal. Like this right here, and it was delicious. I'm not making fun, but this is breakfast and lunch in Nepal. So that's kind of the way that you can start looking at it. And then put a photo in your wallet of where you want to go. And every time you open your wallet, ask, is this purchase helping me get there? And if it's not, put it back, because then you can go. So money is definitely the elephant in the room. But again, I earned a year of freedom off of $9 an hour. So, you can do it. It can be done.
So with Michelle, we had to be more assertive. With Joe, we had, being thrust in like leadership, accepting that responsibility and managing that. What have you seen beyond that, like with people that you worked with, as a benefit for having done a sabbatical? Like, what else is there?
I cry. So much clarity on their own values. Clarity on their values, and also the deep, deep-seated belief that they can live in them. Because taking a sabbatical like this, I mean, you figure out what's important to you, but you don't just talk about it. Like, you take a stand for who you are when you take a sabbatical like this. You have that for the rest of your life. I mean, I've had clients come home. I had one, I think you don't even realize what the gifts of a sabbatical are until you come home. And it's great. I mean, it's not like the sabbatical meant nothing, but you suddenly realize who you are and what that means. And like, for example, recently I had a client who, she's been home for about a year, and she's met this wonderful guy, and she's, you know, having that freak out about starting to care about him. And I'm like, all right, what's going on? Like, let's coach it out. What's up? And she's like, this could go really wrong, and I could get hurt. And I'm like, uh-huh. And your trip could have gone really wrong, and you could have gotten hurt. You got on the plane anyway. So who's that chick? She's like, oh yeah. So you bring yourself home to yourself, because you have to spend all this time with yourself on the road. And I think you just bring home that awareness of who you are, and you get to be proud for the rest of your life that you put your money literally where your mouth was, and you hit the road with it. So that never goes away. You have that forever.
Awesome. So as kind of a final swing for Michelle, we'll start with you. What do you think? You had relief. You finally got to travel, something you always wanted. You came back empowered in your job with a greater respect for your job. What do you think was that underlying? What was that gift that you got from having taken a sabbatical?
I think just believing in myself, probably, because there were a lot of times that I had to figure things out by myself in a country where I didn't know the language sometimes. So I just felt like I had a lot of challenges that I had to work through. And I think it's as like a self-sufficiency or believing in myself, having faith in myself, something like that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Great. Joe, what do you think?
I think for me, it was a greater understanding of the nature of conflict in different regions around the world, and the great need for equipping local leaders in conflict areas with the skills they need to be able to manage conflict on their own. And that it's not about someone from the outside coming in and resolving conflicts for them, but it's about partnering with people using a very systematic framework and key ideas and tools that they can use to manage conflict more effectively.
Tara?
Yeah, I would say
From
just
your own time around.
yeah,
You know?
backpacking on what you're saying.
Backpacking.
Yeah, backpacking on what you're saying. That's a Freudian slip. Piggybacking on what you're saying. No, but seriously, backpacking on what you're saying. I'm going to coin that.
Turn it into a brief.
Turn it into a thing. Hashtag backpacking. When I started my company, it was that idea of like, what the hell am I doing? Like, people are like, I don't get it. I'm like, I don't quite get it yet either. Striking out and leaving corporate. And I mean, I really have an immense amount of love and compassion for my clients when they hit that freak out moment where they really realize how real their trip is. Because I had that. I mean, I called my coach. When I was leaving to start my company, I called her from the conference room, hiding in the conference room behind the door, going, Kathy, I have benefits. I have benefits, Kathy. And she's like, yeah, and what are they costing you? Shut up and go give your resignation. And she was right, but I was like, damn it. But then I suddenly realized, like, I didn't know what I was doing when I hit the road. I had no idea. Like, I went to countries where I didn't speak the language, and I didn't know how to start a company, but I didn't know how to take a sabbatical either, and I figured that out. So that thing of like, I'll figure this out. I'm going to have to wing it, but that's okay. And the other piece was the curiosity. Like, I think there's this piece when you're on the road where you're so curious about everyone. You're like, oh, the light switches are different. And then we come home and we're like, oh, it's home. I try and keep that piece on the road where when you're on a bus in like Delhi, you just think everyone is interesting. And then you're here and you're like, damn Muni commuters. I try and keep that piece with me that's like, everybody I meet on a bus here could possibly be the most interesting person I've ever met. Not always, we've all been there. But I think that's the biggest gift I've gotten is like everyone in San Francisco is just as fascinating as everybody that you meet in Paris if you're just willing to be like, all right, what's up with you? So.
Awesome.
Can I add something just quick?
Yeah.
In addition to what I said before, I also think my trip was a platform, or like it jump-started something. I still feel like I'm traveling in that I will now try new things and I'll do new things, and I don't feel bored anymore ever. And if I do something about it. Whereas before it was kind of, I'm so bored and this sucks, and now I actually do something about it. So
Awesome.
yeah.
Awesome. Well, would anyone like to Q&A? Any questions for these people that bravely took a sabbatical? We'll start with Shaq and then go to you next. Shaq, go for it.
Not sure how to put this, but what happens when you get too comfortable with the sabbatical? You find it hard to get back into orderly life.
Should I go first?
Sure.
I did find it very comfortable in my sabbatical, and did have a hard time coming back into life. It did take me it took me several months to really come back and figure out how I'm going to really come back to the same place and yet feel happy. So it took me a while to realize, okay, I got to start doing new things so that I'm not bored again. So it just took a couple months, and it worked itself out.
I think for me, and I will say this, re-entry coaching is some of the most intense coaching I do. I mean, it can be, it really is kind of like, when the astronauts have to come back in a certain trajectory or you burn up. You have to be careful with the way you come home, I think, in the same way. But it can be, again, one of the most vibrant and creative parts of your trip. And I think one of the things that has helped me was figuring out, yeah, you're going to come home and you are going to be sitting there in that cubicle, possibly being like, oh my gosh, and now I'm here. And for me, I had to figure out, okay, so what was so resonant about my trip? And it was the meeting of new people and the constantly learning and like being engaged. And so, okay, so how am I going to get out into the city and meet new people? And how am I going to keep learning? And so for me, it was getting really involved in photography again and having that be a passion. And I started, SF Travel Lit and Lectures, which is where I know some people that are here tonight from, because I just wanted to be around travelers. Like, I wanted to have those geek outs, like, ooh, where have you been and who did you meet? But I had to kind of crystallize what it was I was missing and then look for it again. So that would be my advice, is when you're coming home, be gentle with yourself and know that it will at times be a little rough, and that's okay. And then figure out, what did I love about my trip, and bottom line it, and then go find it wherever you are. Because you can bring the road home. It's just about figuring out what was so resonant for you.
I think for me, I'd emphasize what you do as you prepare to take a sabbatical. So I think I'd encourage people to not view it as departing from real life and then re-entering it. I think this is your life. I think carefully about why you want to take a sabbatical, what you're hoping to achieve, and then plan appropriately. So, one of the things that Tara was talking about earlier was the low cost of living overseas. It's also easier than ever to actually make money while you're overseas. You can have a travel blog, you can teach English, you can start your own Kickstarter project, and you can fund. All of that becomes part of who you are. I think if you have a plan for what you're trying to accomplish while you're abroad, and especially if it's a secondment where you're arranging with your employer, by the time you come back, you're just building on what you've taken during your time overseas, and then continuing to take advantage of your time abroad.
Awesome.
So as I came late and I cannot ask all the same people who travel, I would ask actually the interviewer, what are your conclusions about these different experiences?
In regards to what?
In regards to what those guys experience. So how would you compare their experience and what do you find in common?
Let's see. I would say before, like in like going away, I think it is interesting. I really like the concept that Joe just brought up, that this is your life, and that it's not some recess or some break or some separation. Like, that's what you're into and that's what you're doing. And I've noticed in my experience since I've come back that it's interesting. I really noticed it because my friends stayed here and lived an American life all the way through, and I went abroad and lived in a foreign life. And so, like, my native life kind of changed, and I lived something alternate to what I knew before. And so it can make a re-entry difficult, but also accepting that that's how the cards played out, I think makes it a lot easier. But in terms of the going away, it's kind of, I didn't have a job to come back to or anything, I just left. So I was about getting out of here and not thinking about coming back, to be honest. Yeah. I don't know, there's a lot more I'm going to have to sit on for another day, and I could probably come up with like 10 more answers tomorrow night. That's a great question. Thank you for asking. Please.
Hi, I'm the therapist on the left. I'm sorry, I forget.
Michelle.
Hi,
Yeah.
Michelle.
Hi.
Yes, I'm just curious on New Zealand versus Australia. Which did you prefer and why? Because they just sound so different. I haven't seen either, but just from what I've heard.
Just Australia. I was just on the East Coast, so I didn't see too much of the country. But New Zealand is, I think, more interesting because it has the terrain is so different. You can hike glaciers, and then you can hike volcanic terrain, and then there's the ocean, and there's all these different things. And there's also a lot of adventure, like bungee jumping, skydiving. So probably New Zealand from that sense. But I also liked Australia too. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay.
Please.
So you all talked about how you brought a part of your curiosity, or what was it that really, resonated with you during your trips back into your life here. And I was just wondering, like, you were all talking about the cultural piece and meeting other cultures, and the Bay Area is very diverse. There's a lot of cultures, but you kind of have to go out and seek it. Are there any activities that you guys have, taken a part in more so after you came back to keep that cultural curiosity alive?
You guys can go first.
I mean, I generally like to participate in meetups, so like language meetups, Spanish language meetups, and you can meet people from all over the world. It's not something that I necessarily started doing just after I returned from my most recent secondment, but if people speak a foreign language or are studying a foreign language, it's a great opportunity, regardless of what level you're at, to just interact with people from all over the globe. And there are definitely lots of different ethnic communities here in San Francisco, and it's fun, and you're normally at a place where you can have a drink or two. So that's something that I do.
Yeah, I do. So a lot of meetups, language exchange, and stuff like that. I mean, that's the nice thing, again, about San Francisco. I mean, you can get involved. You can go to the Alliance Française and take classes. You can go to, cooking meetups. I think some of the, the most fun are literally just, I mean, I can't tell you how many Brazilian cabbies in the city have been like, you went to Recife? Yeah! I mean, like, it's just, you share this common bond. Like, I mean, you tell someone that you've been to their hometown, and it's so lovely. I mean, I'll never forget. I have this one friend, and I kept telling him, like, you gotta go to Brazil. Gotta go to Brazil. And we end up with this Brazilian cabbie. It's like 10:30, 11 at night. It's not super late. But he hears that I've been to his country, and he throws on, like, Brazilian, like, song. It is, like, loud. I'm surprised I'm not deaf after being in his car. And he's just like, welcome to Brazil, ladies! And just starts, like, pumping this music. And she gets out of the cab after we're done. She's like, you weren't kidding about this people being fun. I'm going to, like, tomorrow. You create this, like, portal for people to share their culture and just be proud of where they're from. And I think that's one of my favorite parts about being a traveler, is that you get to find out why people love where they're from and give them the opportunity to share it, and you get the gift of their culture, which is, anyway, I don't know, it's kind of like a long-winded way of putting it. I just love hearing about where people are from and why they moved here and how often they go back and all that jazz. And everybody should go to Brazil, because seriously, those people are fun.
Should I go?
Yeah.
It's a really good point that you bring up, and San Francisco is one of the best cities in the world, I think, especially for cultural experiences. I was pursuing that stuff before I left, and I still do now. But just your question reminded me that I want to do more of that. So, yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah, definitely. I'd add on to that. The idea, what's messed up is having been from here, I didn't realize how diverse it was. Like, I knew it was diverse, but I didn't grasp that concept until I came back, and I could pick out, like, who Mexicans were, who Colombians were, or where the Brazilian music was being played, or where, you know, Middle East or Asia, or wherever in the world, you know, you can, all of a sudden, you know, having been abroad, you kind of just pick out, you have a wider respect for certain areas, and it's kind of like that. I thought Tara brought up a really good point, you know, for coming back. I started going to the meetups called Travel Massives. They're once a month meetups of people that work in the travel industry, travelers, and it's just to get together, put away some beers, and talk. And it, you know, I just went to like an Eritrean cafe over in Oakland the other day. You know, and Eritrea is what, a country of a few million people, you know, but there's enough people here to start a cafe and to start a little culture going. You know, it's like I would have driven right by that 20 years ago. I would have driven directly by it. But now I look and I'm like, no way, I just stop and walk in just for kicks, just to kind of feel that. And it's the flip side. It's like also going abroad, and those of you who are, you know, from other countries and living here, I was telling Tara this today, even when it's not so good at home or it's not so good abroad, it's still cooler to not be cool abroad. Because it's still fresh and you're still stimulated. You're still seeing stuff for the first time. Right? So like even here, you know, it's like you can, you know, living here, you probably feel the same way, you know. I meet a lot of people that are from other places. I get kind of bored here at home. Right? But other people are like, oh no way, the mission, you know, like Valencia, you know, it's the coolest thing in the world. Like, no, it's not. You know, like it's because I'm so native, you know, and like, but yeah, that's what I'd add on to that. Anyone else have questions? Please.
I had a question about how you prepare for your trip. You suggested like financially, but how about emotionally? Like the thoughts of like, oh, you're not going to see your family for months, or you're not going to see friends, or you're going to miss out on certain events or things like that. How did you keep up with that while you were abroad and kind of catch up with it with that?
That's an excellent question. These days, actually, I find that with my clients, it's more about setting boundaries around not staying too in touch with home. We are so tied. I mean, we've like got these digital umbilical cords all the time. I mean, something buzzes and everyone goes, is that me? I mean, literally, you watch it. It's like Pavlov's dogs. Yeah, this is what I will say about being on the road. It's like, it's magical time. It's somehow like elastic and expansive. I mean, you're gone for 6 months and it's like a lifetime. I mean, you can become a whole different person in 6 months to a year. To be honest, back at home, it's not that they won't miss you. It's not a personal affront. They're barely going to notice you were gone. Because, I mean, look at us. We're like, how is it the middle of March? Anybody who's been on the road since January is like, whoa. Like, you know, 10 weeks is a long time on the road. So it's kind of like, you know, the time of magical thinking, because you're out there and you're awash in these possibilities and meeting these new people, and every day you meet someone new who's like, oh my gosh, you're fascinating. Everybody here is going to work. So they will miss you, but it's almost like when you come home, you find that nothing has changed. It's like you were saying, you know, I come back and it's like, wait, nothing changed.
Nothing changed. Yeah.
Nothing changed. And that can actually be hard. So it was like Lee was saying, seek out your people that will get it and support you, because you're going to come home and everyone else will be like, oh, Sharon got bangs. Like, that's what happened while you were gone. And you're like, what? So the big thing is like, but you will get homesick. Seek out your people. When you do need to reach out for home, do. But my thing is like, kind of get the heck off your phone. Because if you're going to be out there tweeting everything that happens, and again, I'm going to sound old, get off my lawn, but there's something that's happened in the last 6 years where, like, if a tree falls in the forest and nobody posts a twit pic about it, did it really happen? Let yourself get away from that a little bit on the road. Like, have experiences that are just yours, and you don't have to justify them to anybody else by being like, check it out on Facebook. I need everybody to like it. And when you get homesick, you know, figure out the ways to deal with that. When I got homesick, I would seek out other Americans and hang out. At one point, I'm not really proud to admit this, but I will, so you feel better about it. I watched about 48 hours straight of CSI Miami in Korea because I just needed to speak English. And I'm like, David Caruso's going to take those sunglasses off, and I'm going to pay attention. Get your social comfort food is probably the best way to put it. And if you have to watch CSI Miami, do it. There you go. And now you all know that about me, and I'm not ashamed.
One of my favorite parts of being in Kenya was there was an Indiana University medical program in the town where I was, Eldoret, just a couple blocks away. And so there were weekly American-Kenyan dodgeball games, wiffle ball games, soccer games, and that sort of community was very helpful in overcoming any sort of homesickness I might have had. I'd also say that, and that wasn't even my alma mater, I didn't go to Indiana, but I think you can seek out your alma mater, which probably has some sort of study abroad program in wherever you are, and connect with people that way. Certainly, spending time in hostels, meeting new people, not just from your home country, but from all over, is a great way to overcome homesickness. The only other piece of advice I'd say, if you're trying to manage relationships with people here, whether it's boyfriend, girlfriend, parents, is to set expectations and let them know that, as Tara said, you're not going to be attached to your device the same way you are here. Maybe it means, we're going to talk on the phone once a week or twice a week, but be on the same page, because if they're expecting that you're going to be responsive right away to every text message they send and you have a different idea, that's when I think it can sort of damage the relationship and make managing any sort of long-distance relationship more challenging.
And it can actually get really bad, because did you hear what happened in Peru lately?
Yes.
There was, so, and like, to backpack on that, let your mom know if you're not going to call for a month, because no joke, there was a couple who was backpacking through Peru, and they went out into the Amazon, and they were having the time of their lives. Apparently his mom was like super nervous. She literally got on the phone with like the Peruvian military and was like getting the generals going to go find her kid. It was all over Facebook and all over the blogs, and it turned out
all over media.
Yeah, all over the media. And of course, like, so the Peruvian government's freaking out because they've got this American mother who's like, "You find my son!" Like, literally. And so it was like awful stereotype on this side, awful stereotypes on that side, like Peru's dangerous, which it's not. And finally, this kid comes out of the woods, literally, and is like, "What's going on?" They've got like guns trained on him, and they've been in the Amazon, and he and his girlfriend are like, "We're so in love, we're having the time of our life." What the hell? Let your mom know if you're not going to call for a month. That's an excellent point, because not only is your mom might be mad at you, but you might actually literally cause an international incident. Look it up. It's actually pretty funny. So.
I guess for me it wasn't an issue at all. I was forming connections as I was going, and I was really excited to get away from everybody and just be away. And also, every time I got to an internet cafe, I would email people and get on Facebook. So the only times I would say I missed people were holiday, like Thanksgiving, I was gone, and so I missed that. But otherwise, just the meeting new people and forming connections was enough. I'm still friends with a lot of the people that I met, so it wasn't a problem for me.
Awesome. Well, due to some unfortunate time constraints, we're going to have to call it here, but let's please give a round of applause to our speakers tonight. Thank you, guys. And thank all you for coming. Really appreciate you guys showing up, and we will keep you posted on next month's gig, and Catherine will be here too. So, but thank you very much for coming tonight and being a part of the third fade out music.
I was like, it's like the Oscars.
Yeah. So roll credits. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.